Hello good people, Eber here with Hardware Canucks, and this is Razer's top-of-the-line, most expensive gaming keyboard to date. It's the Razer Huntsman Elite. Let's check this out. Alright, so judging by that B-roll, you may or may not have guessed the price tag of the Razer Huntsman Elite. And if you haven't, well, allow me to spoil it for you guys. So this keyboard, or this thing right here, costs $200 US. Take a moment to swallow that because that isn't cheap, and interestingly enough, it competes head-to-head with Corsair's K95 RGB Platinum mechanical gaming keyboard for the same cost. And if you're interested in learning more about that keyboard, I've actually done a full review on the channel, and you can check it out right over here. Okay, so why did Razer come out with such an expensive mechanical gaming keyboard in 2018? I mean, if you think about it, the market is way too saturated at this point that makes it quite difficult to differentiate one keyboard from another, unless if you're looking for a specific feature. Well, Razer is launching the Huntsman Elite by focusing on three key areas, and that is speed and performance with the help of their newly designed Razer opto-mechanical switch, the second being comfort and aesthetics, and the last, of course, being a little bit of flair with Chroma RGB lighting. So while I was testing the Razer Huntsman Elite gaming keyboard, I got another interesting package from Razer in this large Pelican case. I'm not exactly sure what use it would have been to me, but regardless, this is what it is. It's another gaming keyboard, but this time it's their standard Huntsman keyboard when compared to the Elite. So the difference between this keyboard and the Elite is that it doesn't come with dedicated media playback buttons, and it also does not come with a detachable wrist rest with the underglow, which we'll talk about later on in the video. But rest aside, it's basically the same keyboard, and it comes with the same or the brand new Razer optomechanical switch. The difference in price, $150 versus obviously $200. So let me walk you through my experience testing out the Razer Huntsman Elite right after a message from our sponsor.
The new OCZ TR200 from Toshiba is a great value SSD if you're considering upgrading your hard drive and get a nice boost in performance with cutting-edge 3D flash memory and ultra-reliable controller with built-in power management. Available in different capacities, check it out below.
First things first, the design. And right off the bat, the Huntsman Elite does look like a typical mechanical keyboard. There are no signs of aggressive design elements throughout the chassis, and I like that. It is a full-size keyboard with a numpad, and they've tried their best to make it as compact as they can. In fact, it's about the same size as the Logitech G513 keyboard that I looked at recently. Now, when you compare this to something like the K95 Platinum, it's obviously a little bit smaller because with Razer, you don't get dedicated macro buttons, which is disappointing, and the top side of the frame is a bit extended on the K95 because you've got the RGB logo. Interestingly enough, I was not able to spot any Razer branding on the Huntsman Elite apart from the subtle engraved implementation on the wrist rest, which I'll get to shortly. On the top right hand side of the board, Razer has included dedicated media playback buttons, which is good use of space, but to be honest, I'm not happy with the button mechanics. They feel very cheap when compared to the K95 Platinum, and they're not backlit. Seriously, Razer, I mean, there are subtle LEDs under the keys, but they don't shine through the signs to illuminate them. It just doesn't make any sense. Corsair does a much better job with their playback buttons. The volume dial on the Huntsman Elite lacks definition in terms of scroll steps. When adjusting the volume, it doesn't feel consistent and feels like scraping the plastic underneath, which might sound odd, but again, it just doesn't feel right to me. Now, by default, the dial can be used to control the volume, but Razer calls it the multi-function digital dial, and it can be customized to another function like switching between apps or zooming into windows, or even launch apps or utility-focused applications like snipping tool, notepad, calculator, or even task manager. Remember, this has to be done through Synapse, but I did wish if Razer gave us the option to assign third-party applications. Needless to say, this is a cool feature that you might be interested in, but personally, I still prefer the default volume adjust, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this multi-function dial in the comments down below. This keyboard also comes with a wrist rest, and it is an expectation of this price point. The plush leatherette material is really comfortable to type with. In fact, it's very similar to the one found on the G513 by Logitech, albeit the one on the Razer is just a bit bigger than the G513. It's like pillows for your wrists, and who doesn't like that? And if you're looking for a wow factor, check this out. The wrist rest features underglow RGB lighting, and it syncs up with the lighting on the chassis to give out this cool, subtle lighting effect in the night, and it looks amazing. Seriously, Razer has always amazed me with chroma lighting on their peripherals. The color shift gradient is so smooth, and it's quite mesmerizing to use at and during the night. Now, for those of you wondering, the wrist rest is detachable, and it connects to the chassis via proprietary pogo pins for power. In fact, Razer had to use a separate USB cable to just power the keyboard and the underglow. At first, I thought that this cable was for a USB pass-through port, but that's not the case here. Speaking of USB pass-through ports, there are none to be found on the Huntsman Elite, which is unacceptable for a $200 gaming keyboard. Now, coming back to the pogo pin connectors located at the bottom of the chassis and of course the wrist rest, Razer is actually working, or they're planning on working with third-party vendors to create other accessories like a wireless phone charging dock, or perhaps a tablet that could just connect to your keyboard. Again, I'm not exactly sure where they're taking this approach with, but personally, I'm a little bit skeptical about that, because the fact that you might have to attach, or if you're looking to attach accessories underneath the chassis, would obviously result in clearance issues with your wrist or your hands, and of course reaching those keys, because you want to be able to get, the most important thing when you're gaming is just having a comfortable space to game on. And if you start adding accessories, especially in the middle of your hands, then it just doesn't make any sense. It might be a concerning factor for some of you, but again, I'm more curious to see what they're going to be coming up with in the future, if they do. The cable is non-removable. It's super thick and braided. It was actually a little bit difficult for me to route on my desk. It kind of feels similar to the Corsair K95 Platinum RGB mechanical keyboard. So don't expect, a removable cable coming out of this keyboard, because obviously there's a lot of bandwidth to drive the chroma lighting on the keyboard, and of course, getting that information passed back and forth between the controller. And so, yeah, that's something to keep note of. The build quality on the Huntsman Elite is really good. They've used a matte black aluminum frame on top of hard plastic materials. It's pretty durable for long-term use, and the body itself is quite heavy, and I noticed that right away after switching from my G Pro TKL keyboard. Now, this isn't something to be worried about, because the keyboard by itself is going to be stationary at your desk for the most part, so I don't see this as a problem. Okay, so let's talk about Razer's new opto-mechanical switch. The technology behind the switch design is pretty interesting. They've essentially harnessed optical light instead of traditional metallic contacts to make keystrokes actuate. So a light beam passes through the switch stem, and when a key is pressed, the corresponding signal is being sent to the computer at that instant. This yields in 45 grams of actuation force and an actuation point at 1.5 millimeters. Now, to put this in perspective, the Cherry MX speed switches requires the same amount of force, but it actuates at just 1.2 millimeters. So it's 0.3 millimeters faster than the Razer Opto switches. And they're linear too. With Razer's new offering, you're getting a satisfying tactile click, kind of like MX Blue switches, but expect a faster typing experience than them. So if you're someone who owns a mechanical keyboard with Cherry MX Blue switches, and if you're looking for something a little bit more faster without compromising on that tactile feedback, the clicky feel that you get, then the Razer optomechanical switches should be a great option to look into, simply because you still get that tactile feedback, and they're a lot lighter to actuate when compared to MX Blues, that's for sure. Another cool advantage is that the keystrokes, or they're actually a lot more durable. So Razer claims that these new switches can last 100 million keystrokes compared to 50 million on the Cherry MX offerings. So that could be taken as an advantage for long-term use. But again, that's something to be tested over time. Now, having tested the K95 RGB Platinum here in the studio, I can still vouch for the fact that the MX Speed switches are by far the fastest switches ever made. If you're someone who's looking for a keyboard with the fastest possible switch with all the exclusive features that you need, like dedicated keys and stuff like that, then looking into MX Speed on the K95 is obviously your best bet, because they're fast. I don't think you can find anything. I mean, the Opto switches come nowhere closer to the experience when you're using the K95 Platinum or MX Speed switches in general. Razer also claims that the new optomechanical switch can save up to 20 milliseconds of delay for each keystroke due to the optical light that it uses to actuate. Now, I can't scientifically test that, but in real-world use, it just performs like a standard mechanical keyboard. I was pretty quick at getting used to these switches, and the tactile feedback is certainly satisfying. Here's a quick sound test. Okay, so gaming on the Huntsman Elite was good. I was certainly not mind blown by the performance of these new switches. Like I mentioned before, they feel very similar to Cherry MX Blue offerings, with the exception of requiring less force to actuate, so finger fatigue shouldn't be a problem over long-term use. I was easily able to navigate through my gameplay, and overall, it was a pleasant experience. Razer Synapse actually recognizes certain titles and illuminates the WASD keys depending on the type of play. It just helps differentiate your primary keys with the rest. Okay, so I do want to spend some time and talk about Razer Synapse 3 software that comes with this new keyboard, or just any Razer peripherals. First and foremost, I really hate the fact that you're supposed to create an account and be connected online in order to create this whole initial setup process. And the fact that you need to be connected online just to access controls is a bit weird. It's so, I mean, it doesn't make any sense in the first place. Again, it's a sloppy job by the software team by Razer. I'm not sure why they require users to create an account with Synapse. I mean, I get the fact that you can get to sync your settings across all these devices, but give us an offline mode. I mean, give users the option at the very beginning of the setup screen where you can choose to either use online or offline, because I certainly wasn't able to find that with Synapse. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Next up, the UI. It's definitely improved in terms of visuals over these years, but unfortunately, I had a difficult time customizing lighting and macros on the Huntsman Elite with my main PC. Lighting would stop functioning at times, Synapse would crash, if I change an effect, the keyboard wouldn't do anything. It was pretty frustrating, but thankfully, everything just worked fine after I plugged the keyboard into a notebook. Again, this could just be my PC, but I just wanted to bring it up. Navigating through Synapse is fairly straightforward. The user is greeted with a physical view of the keyboard along with different modules, like being able to integrate Philips Hue lighting. Once you click on the keyboard, you do have the option to reprogram each key and also customize the multifunction dial that I talked about earlier. The lighting tab allows you to cycle between 8 different lighting effects, including breathing, fire, reactive, ripple, spectrum cycling, starlight, static, and wave, which is my personal favorite. You can also adjust the brightness by either turning it off or dimming it to a minimum setting here, but that can also be done within the keyboard through the function keys. Speaking of which, you have the G key that disables the Windows key and on-the-fly macro recordings as well. Then there's Chroma Studio, which is a custom lighting effects control space that allows the user to create their own lighting effects and explore their creativity with RGB lighting. Do note that if you have other Razer gaming peripherals like a mouse or a set of speakers with Chroma, Synapse will automatically detect those devices and you can sync lighting across those devices as well, which is pretty cool.
Join the wireless club with Corsair's new Dark Core mouse. Play the way you want with 9 programmable buttons aligned in a comfortable shape, a fantastic sensor you can trust, and crazy good wireless performance, plus Qi wireless charging built in. Focus on the game, the Dark Core will do the rest.
So to conclude, the Huntsman Elite by Razer is an odd entry in 2018 in my opinion. For one, you can get a lot more for $200 with a K95 RGB Platinum, because there are a few things that I find lacklusting, or just that I find that doesn't make any sense on the Huntsman Elite, or the fact that they haven't included. For one, dedicated programmable buttons. I find that missing on this keyboard. I mean, for $200, it is an expectation. A USB pass-through port, they've decided to not include one on the Huntsman. And the dedicated media playback buttons kind of feel cheap. It's like you have, a Ferrari of a keyboard, but then you kind of have like a Prius, or not a Prius, maybe like a Civic attached to it. I'm not sure if that made a good analogy, but I hope you get the point. So that's something that I found to be really odd with the Huntsman Elite. It's certainly a good keyboard for Razer enthusiasts out there if you're looking for something a little bit more innovative, if you're looking to try out new switches. Then the new optomechanical switch is certainly interesting because it gives you that tactile feedback without having to actuate or put a lot of force into it compared to MX Blues. Definitely not as fast as MX Speed switches, but I'm sure that you'll have a great time gaming on these new switches. The lighting is of course fantastic. You cannot go wrong with Chroma lighting. Of course, the detachable wrist rest features RGB lighting. That's next level when it comes to lighting on a keyboard. Speaking of the wrist rest, it is super comfortable to type with. I mean, this plush leatherette material is, again, this is exactly what wrist rests are supposed to be made in the first place, but I'm glad that companies like Razer are slowly starting to approach wrist rest with this material. We first saw that with Logitech's G513 keyboard. Again, a fantastic keyboard for the price at $150. So if you're looking for something, within those lines, then again, you have the option within the Logitech G513 keyboard, the regular Razer Huntsman keyboard that also costs the same price, but you don't get a wrist rest, so that's a little bit odd. And of course, you have this $200 expensive Elite Huntsman keyboard. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on Razer's new Huntsman Elite keyboard. What do you guys think about it? Is it worth $200? Are you disappointed with the fact that Razer's forgot to include a USB pass-through port or dedicated macro buttons or things like that? Love to hear your thoughts again. I'm Ibar with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.